Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10, the NFL football podcast here on Clueless Gamers. I'm one of your hosts, Pete, joined in a second by my co-host, Brian. Guys, it's been a minute. It's been exactly basically a month since we have recorded this podcast. There's been a numerous reasons for that, which we'll get into in a second. But it is so good to be back tonight. Two games were played here in the NFL to kick off the final week 18 of the NFL season here in 2022. We're going to get into those games. We're going to cover a lot of NFL news that's going on, some rumors as we approach kind of Black Monday, which is the head coaching firings that it is usually called here on this upcoming Monday. And we're going to give, of course, our final Week 18, our final regular season picks here for the season. With all that being said off the top, I'll welcome in my co-host, Brian. Brian, how you been, man? Happy belated holidays to you. Happy New Year. And it's so good to be back and have you back. So how you doing?
Yes, same to you and to our listeners out there. Hope it's been a good holiday season and a happy new year. And it's amazing that we're winding down this football season already. And so fast it goes. I feel like it goes faster than any of the other sports. And here we are, as you mentioned, in week 18. And then it's playoff time where hopefully we'll be here on a weekly basis to break down all things going on in the playoffs because it looks like it will be a very fun postseason coming up.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's going to be big time. We hope to be here every single week. That is going to be the intention. Why we weren't here for a month is basically the standard. I mean, it was just really work-related issues and getting together and some scheduling problems. We were supposed to also record this episode, which is the first topic that we're going to talk about today because it has to be. I mean, why wouldn't it be? We were going to record on Monday night after probably the biggest game of the year that was going to happen between Buffalo and Cincinnati. And then the entire situation took place there in Cincinnati with Damar Hamlin. Yes, our thoughts and prayers, of course, are out to him still. We are very thankful that situation has looks very well. It looks very productive. It's on the upside. He's awake now. He's fully neurologically intact. He's functional. He's been FaceTiming. He's been writing. He's been talking. If you have not heard of this situation in the last week, basically what happened was his heart stopped on the field in the game. It seems like it was just kind of a freak accident that happened on a tackle with wide receiver of Cincinnati, T. Higgins, and his heart stopped. He kind of got up, collapsed. It's a very disturbing video to watch. I don't really recommend looking it up. And thankfully, to all the people out there, all the medical professionals, everyone that was on the field, they quickly were able to administer CPR to him and literally save his life on the field. I mean, it's something unprecedented. The NFL, us as fans, no one's ever seen anything like this take place on an NFL football field, really on almost any sports field. It's a very scary situation, and the quick acting work that they did on the field in Cincinnati, saved this young man's life. And then, the work that they also did at the Cincinnati hospital as well was just tremendous. Everyone out there, I think in the NFL community, did an excellent job of really praying and rallying behind everything with Hamlin. He had a kind of a toy charity going on for kids. That was, I think the original goal was something like $2,500 or something when he opened it up. The last I checked, it was over $8 million. So that's a
Amazing.
huge props to the NFL community and people out there all around the country and the world. Just amazing what people can do when they get together and really kind of administer some good vibes and some hope and just really positive thinking. And thankfully, he is completely all right. Obviously, we didn't want to do this on Monday because it was a scary situation that had just happened. The updates were very, very limited. He was in critical condition at the time and was in a medically induced coma, as far as I understand. So it was a very touch and go situation there. So we felt it wouldn't be in the best taste to record a podcast during circumstances like that. Thankfully, we could come on and be in a lot more of a light and hopeful situation where he's in great spirits. And I thought it was just crazy. It kind of speaks to just a typical NFL player, but really I've been watching. I knew of him going into this game and when he stepped in for Micah Hyde, like I knew all that stuff, but I never had like given a deep dive into him as a person. And I've done that a lot in this last almost week now. And what a tremendous guy that he is and everything he's done. He just seems like a great person, really kind of soft spoken, but has some good energy there. They've been playing a lot of his kind of like sideline mic'd up moments. And then to get into his charity and get into the background of that. And to the first thing for him to ask when he gets up is asking if they won the game
Yeah.
Just speaks to a true NFL player and kind of the person he is as well. I'm assuming a lot of people would be like that. And the doctors really said, yeah, you won. You won the game of life, which I think is the thing that we have to take most away. I appreciate his tenacity for the game, but of course his health is most important. Whether he comes back and plays at any point next season is irrelevant. It's just amazing that the what those medical professionals did and his just fight and grit into saving his own life is also immensely powerful. It's definitely something that moved me as well, and we wanted to talk about it to kick off the show. So, Bri, I'll toss it to you on your thoughts on that situation. I mean, it was for me, it was like the scariest thing I've ever watched in sports television, where I'm watching it live, and we've seen a lot of horrifying neck injuries and stuff over the years. Ryan Shazier is one of those that unfortunately comes to the mind, who's another amazing individual. And to see that happen was really, really scary. What were you thinking in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, when it first happened, I think we're so accustomed to seeing injuries in football that at first, when you see a player down, and even if they're down for an extra minute or so, you don't really think too much of it immediately. You just think, oh, it's another injury. But
Right.
it became pretty clear fairly quickly that this was something out of the ordinary with the amount of time that it was taking, and then you hear, of course, like you mentioned, the CPR being in, and just how long it was taking, and then the expressions on the players' faces,
Yeah.
and when they show Josh Allen, they show players starting to kneel and starting to pray, then you realize that you're dealing with something totally out of the ordinary. And yeah, I mean, it was incredibly scary. I mean, I got to be honest, after the game was called, which there was no reason for them to come back on
No,
the field. I mean,
absolutely.
I don't think anything, they clearly got that right. But with the game being called as early as it was, I had a very uneasy feeling the rest of that night up
Me too.
until I went to bed.
Yeah.
I just was not feeling myself after watching that, and being kind of glued to the coverage, looking for some kind of update and realizing it probably wasn't going to be coming.
Yeah.
But just the somberness from everybody, they went to the studio, and I really think ESPN handled it extremely
I agree.
well. I mean, Joe Buck gets a lot of criticism, but I think you'd have to say he had the right temperament. He was the right guy to kind of set the scene, if you will, with a situation like this. So I think the coverage was well received and should have been. And obviously, like you said, I mean, the greatest thing that's come out of it is that he is doing so much better, that the amount of people that have come to his side to pray and to donate to his charity, I mean, it's just shown the real human aspect of everybody out there, whether it's football world or anybody. And I think what made this different was that everybody saw it. This was a standalone game. It
I know.
wasn't a Sunday afternoon where there's 10, 12 games going on at one time. Still would have been a horrible thing.
Of
But the
course.
fact that this was the only game, that it was a huge matchup, all eyes were glued to this game. And to see that happen, I just really think it struck everybody watching. And but like I said, the best thing is that the updates are encouraging. He's doing much better. You didn't know that this would be the outcome. Some people were probably thinking the worst at the time. So to see that he's doing better, I don't want to say recovering yet, but at least in better spirits, alert and neurologically intact, as you mentioned, all extremely positive signs going forward, and the worst certainly looks like it was avoided.
I think that's well said. And yeah, those were some very scary moments. It was hard not to be concerned or emotional, just as a person, not even just an NFL fan. Um, and I'm very thankful that things seem to be on the up and up. They seem to be working out. I mean, of course, it's gonna be a road back. There's work to be done for him. But you can't help but think it's just a medical miracle. I mean, just if it's not, I saw a lot of people saying, if this is not a perfect PSA for everybody to practice and learn how to do proper CPR, I don't know what is. And that's ultimately what saved his life, literally right there on the field. And it's something that I remember we learned I think in high school so many years ago, but it's something that I don't even remember anymore. And it's something I'm definitely interested in getting to certified in that in case in the event of a horrible situation taking place near me. So just really happy that worked out, and our prayers are still with him and his family. I think the coverage by ESPN, as you said, I thought was great. I thought it was handled the best you could in a very difficult, unprecedented circumstance by the broadcasting crew, by the studio, by really everybody, even in the days afterwards,
Yep.
in what they did from RG3 to Orlovsky and Rex Ryan and Joe Buck and Troy and Scott Van Pelt and Ryan Clark. I thought was
Yep.
fantastic. I mean, I think that was
Yep.
a lot of them out there that really, really handled the situation in the way they had to, and of course this has been talked about. I just wanted to make a little note of that. All the hate too that T. Higgins was getting, I thought was really unfounded. That's a very routine football play. Even DeMar's family came out and were like, the
Hmm.
young man doesn't deserve this. I mean, he didn't
Yeah.
do anything. It wasn't a dirty play. It was literally just kind of a freak accident. Seemed to happen. Just that we don't even know fully yet. Like the medical reports haven't fully come out yet, but it seems like maybe the helmet hit in between heartbeats, like just something
Right.
just so rare.
Yeah.
And it's happened in a couple other sports. You hear about this in high school where players getting hit with a baseball to the chest or something like that. Like it's a very,
Hmm.
very, very freak thing, especially in something like football, which is actually insane to think about, considering how much of a physical and contact sport is, that this doesn't happen more. And I thought a lot of that stuff that people were saying with T. Higgins was really, really wrong. So I'm glad that a lot of that seems to have been cleared up and he seems to be doing better because, he plays a part in this too as well. I'm sure even though he had no reason to, I'm sure he felt horrible about the situation. He talked about how scared he was with it. And that was the last thing he needed to be thinking about as well. So, yeah, just our hats off there to what happened. We'll talk more later in the show of the implications going forward from a football perspective, but none of that mattered in the moment. It doesn't even matter now. It just matters that DeMar is alive, and he seems to be fully okay and on the road to recovery. So yeah, we'll give you more updates as that goes on. But we had to lead off the show with that. So we're gonna try to do the show kind of as normal and not as somber going forward here for our final regular season show. But there's no way we could have started the show without talking about that situation. So Bry, with all that being said, let's jump into Week 18 of the 2022 season, the last week of the NFL season, which, as you said at the top, is crazy. I feel like every year we go, oh, we can't believe we're back, and then in the blink of an eye, the
Yeah.
NFL season is over.
Yeah.
Still a lot of football to be played. The playoffs I think are going to be exciting, the Super Bowls and all that stuff. But for right now, these are big implication games that went on. We saw two of them tonight. It kicked off with Kansas City and the Las Vegas Raiders. Kansas City went to Las Vegas, and regardless of everything that happened, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they still had to win to secure the number one seed. So this was a game where the Chiefs, it was a big deal for them. I saw a few people, Bride, during the week picking the Raiders on an upset alert. I thought that was ridiculous. I'm like, man, is this just Chiefs hate or are people smoking glue? Like, what's going on here? I not only thought they would win, I thought they would easily cover. They ended up doing that. I think it opened at about 6.5, I believe was kind of the number I saw it around. Jared Stidham starting his second game. He played decently well last week against San Francisco, who really had their worst defensive game of the year. But overall, we kind of knew, even with them getting Waller and Renfro back, that was kind of fool's gold. It was just one good game. And you're playing KC that really has dominated all year long, despite a lot of the haters out there, still complaining about Tyreek Hill or still complaining about this Mahomes or that. I mean, look, tonight, he didn't put up insane numbers. What, about 202 passing yards? But he hits another 8 different receivers, 1 touchdown, no turnovers. Just played a really flawless game, I thought, and what was necessary to kind of game manage in that to secure the win. You didn't have to do anything too crazy against the Raiders. Brian, when you watched this game, which was definitely the least exciting of the two games tonight, what was your final takeaway for the Chiefs for them securing the number one seed, and then ultimately the first team this season in the Las Vegas Raiders that we witnessed play their final game of the season?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you could go. I mean, you mentioned kind of the modest pass total from Mahomes, and I think it was the second play of the game, he hits a 67-yard pass
Yeah,
play to,
yeah.
to Justin Watson. So you thought he'd be in for a big day passing wise, and that wasn't to be. But the Chiefs really didn't have any problem in this game. I mean, the Raiders, it's been a tumultuous season to say the least,
As it
and
is
we
every
know
year.
we know going back to before the season when I picked this team to make the playoffs, and
Yeah.
they just blew so
Shame,
many
Brian.
leads.
Shame.
Yeah, they blew so many leads
Yeah.
early in the season. Then they started to get it going, and then of course there was the Rams debacle. I mean, and I don't think we've been on since they had the crazy ending in the Patriot game, which
Yes.
was maybe the
Which
craziest ending
is
I've ever seen
was
in a football
ridiculous.
game. So it feels like their season, every game is just has some sort of crazy play. Even in their wins, remember Josh Jacobs had like a walk-off 80-something yard
Seattle.
touchdown in overtime.
Yeah.
Devontae Adams had a walk-off touchdown and a win at Denver. So their season has just been insane. And then you get down the stretch and they bench Derek Carr, and there's rumors about him just like
Yeah.
leaving the team. So I don't really know what stands with that. It seems like his career as a Raider is over.
I would think so.
And I mean, it was a I don't know how you categorize it. An up and down run, I guess, as quarterback for the Raiders. He certainly had years where he put up good numbers, but
Yeah.
team just never could get over the hump. I mean, this year their defense was just atrocious. Let's be honest. But back to the game today, there wasn't really a whole lot that surprised me. I mean, when you have
Agreed.
Jarrett Stidham in there, like you mentioned, he played well. He really did in the game last week against San Francisco, but he could not make it back to back good performances. Really was a poor performance from him today, and Mahomes didn't really need to do too much, and the Chiefs just cruised. So they have the number one seed. Raiders, we already knew were going to be out going into this game, so I don't really think there's a whole lot that we learned.
No, there's not too much. I mean, I just know I learned once again that the Chiefs are dominant. I've been on this all season. I've been saying this all season. All the people that were kind of low balling Patrick Mahomes, putting him as number 4, number 5, number 6 best QB in the league, I thought were ridiculous. Um, as the way it stands, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show, but as it stands, kind of looks like he's the MVP of the league, given Jalen Hurts' injury. So I think that should just say what kind of season that he had. I think there's a little bit of fatigue on Mahomes, where he's so good so often that it's very much like the Brady syndrome. Now I'm not saying that those two QBs are near each other in terms of legacy at this point, but I'm saying it's very much that you're so good that people are over you, and I
Yeah.
very much feel like it's that way with the Chiefs. To be fair, the Chiefs also do bring on a little bit of that hate. We saw that a little bit today. They run a play that ends up getting called back from a penalty where they do a little ring around the rosy. And,
What was that? Was
yeah,
one of the stranger things I've
I
seen on
guess
a
they were
football
just trying
field.
to, confuse the defense because you don't know where players are coming out of the huddle. It ends up being a touchdown. I believe it was to Kadarius Toney, and then it got called back.
Yep.
It was just a play that I don't know if we're going to see that in the playoffs, but that's sometimes where the Chiefs can be hated a little bit, and Andy Reid could get a little too cute with some plays. I can understand that, but overall, you can't hate, and you have to admire the efficiency of this team, what they're able to do. I do think their defense, as usual, leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, usually in the playoffs, Steve Spagnuolo is a big proponent of pass rushing and really blitzing. They usually play their way up into form. There was a couple plays in this game where they dropped some interceptions, but Chris Jones is really what makes this team go. I've liked what I've seen out of Karlaftis. I think he's been really nice up front. He's come on here in the second half of the season. Will McDuffie make those plays in the back end that they really need? Those are going to be the questions. Nick Bolton, I think, is a really solid player as well. They're just going to have to get that defense going, because when they play some of these high-powered potential offenses in the Bills, in the Bengals, they're even possibly even the Jags or the Chargers, they're going to be able to need to protect a lot more. You're not going to get great practice out of the Raiders today. Really, the only one on defense making any plays is Max Crosby. Weird stat, the Raiders, when Max Crosby, which I thought was a little bit ticky-tacky, but that's how QBs are nowadays, he got flagged near the end zone for that roughing the passer toward the second half of the game. That was the first roughing the passer call on the Raiders the entire season. So
That's shocking.
yeah, so just one of those weird stats
Yeah.
that ended up happening in the NFL. But he's really the only player they got going. I mean, Farrell, he's looked good in the second half of the season. Once upon a time, the fourth pick overall, which was a questionable pick then of the Las Vegas Raiders. I believe it was then the Oakland Raiders when they made that pick out of Clemson.
Right.
So there's a couple pieces there, maybe, but they got to do an overhaul of the defense. As you mentioned, looks like Derek Carr is done. He kind of stepped away from the team because he thought it would limit distractions. I think either way, it was going to be a distraction no matter he was there or not there. But McDaniel's basically given him the boot. I think it's a questionable decision. I think Carr is kind of anywhere from a top 10 to 15 quarterback in my mind. I think he's a really solid QB. What he did last season to drag this team through everything that they were going through to the playoffs and almost win a game there on the road against Cincinnati. They were inside the 10-yard line to end the game.
Yeah.
I just think he was not given enough praise. Does he leave a little bit to desire sometimes? Sure, but that offensive line has really been bad almost his entire career with the Raiders. That defense, they gave a stat that since he's entered the league, his defense has been ranked 32nd as an average, the worst in the league. I mean, what do you want him to do? And now you're going to go through with Jared Stidham next year, or you're going to make a play for Brady maybe? I think that's a very questionable decision that's going over there in Las Vegas right now. Mark Davis came out after the game tonight and said he was disgusted by how many away fans keep overwhelming the stadium here in Las Vegas and what a disgrace it is to Raider fans. I thought that was a really weird thing to be saying at the end of the season as well. Why call out your fans that pay money when you're not putting the product on the field and you're probably the poorest owner in the NFL? That's just the Raiders. So we'll see a lot in the offseason. There's going to be so many interest. We'll definitely be back for some free agency and draft news when the season goes on, because I think there's going to be a lot to talk about in terms of draft and QB carousel. But overall, that kind of wraps up this game. We'll see the Chiefs. We'll see the Raiders next season. We'll see the Chiefs in the playoffs. And hopefully we'll have some better AFC West competition next year. Rest in peace, Bri, to your AFC West division champ prediction. They finished in last, or second to last, finished in third. And really rough season for the Raiders.
Well, in fairness, I didn't have them winning the division. I think I still had Kansas City, but I did have them making the playoffs and actually winning the wild card round. So
all right, we'll have to look back at the tape on that one. We're gonna have to check that out. But overall, didn't work out for them or for you this season.
No.
In the more interesting game, in the second game here on Saturday, the Tennessee Titans, they went down to Duval and they played the Jacksonville Jaguars, which ended up being a game that was for the AFC South, something that I don't think we saw at the beginning of the season. The Jags were basically dead. I think at one point they were 3-7. They've won 6 of the last 7, including 5 in a row. They've been on some kind of streak. Tonight, it was a struggle. It seemed a little bit like the moment got to them, especially on offense. You don't see Trevor Lawrence, who's played really well this season, especially in the second half of the season, miss a wide open Zay Jones like that, which almost cost them the game. I mean, that literally, before that defensive touchdown happens that wins the game, that was the game. Like, that 4-point swing was what was the deciding factor at that point. So there was some missed opportunities. He also had a fumble, I believe, in the red zone area as well at one point. But the defense, they came to play. They get 2 turnovers, which was 10 points, including the touchdown that they scored there on Dobbs that they turned over, which was Tennessee's third-string quarterback that they had coming into here. They decided to go with him instead of Malik Willis. That was looking like a fantastic decision in the first half. And in the second half, he kind of crashed back down to reality. There was some defensive adjustments, clearly, by the Jacksonville staff. And ultimately, the Tennessee Titans win 20-16. I mean, the Jags win 20-16 in Duval County down there in Florida. Bri, your takeaway here of the Jags winning their 4th division title in franchise history, the first since 2017. And they're headed back to the playoffs, hosting a playoff game.
Yeah, that year 2017, they got, remember, to the AFC title game before they ran into New England, and that was the end of things as it is for so many teams.
10 points in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. And remember, it's Blake Bortles was the quarterback.
Yeah, that was Saxonville then with Ramsey and all those
They really
guys.
rode that defense, and then that defense got totally dismantled. I mean, they just started trading everybody.
They did.
One at a time there, but yeah, now they're back. I mean, you mentioned it. Trevor Lawrence is really playing the best football of his career there for a few week period. We really didn't see it on display tonight. I mean, it was probably one of his weaker games. The team really had nothing working on the ground. I mean,
No.
with Travis Etienne totaling 17 yards rushing. I mean, Christian Kirk was really a savior in this game.
He
He
was.
really stepped up, made big plays. He was kind of Lawrence's go-to guy. I mean, we've seen Evan Engram kind of break out lately. He kind of had a quiet game today, but he'd become a pretty big part of the offense in recent weeks. To me, it was a surprise going into this game with how Tennessee has collapsed, and we know about the issues with quarterback Tannehill going down, and they were missing Derrick Henry for a period. But at first, like when I heard that this game was for the division, it was like the Titans have been playing so poorly. How
No.
was this for the division? And remember the first meeting in Tennessee, they got thrashed by
Yeah.
Jacksonville just a few weeks ago. So I really think Jacksonville's the much more deserving team. I mean, it's not really the fault of Tennessee and Mike Vrabel per
Most
se. I
injured
mean,
team
when
in the
you
league.
lose your quarterback, yeah, and they were saying it on the broadcast today. I think 23 players on injured reserve this year, so they've just lost so many key guys and have really battled their way through. I mean, Dobbs has been serviceable. I think definitely proving to be a better option than Willis.
Looks like
But
it at the
just
moment.
yeah, just not enough firepower on offense. You know, they just don't have the weaponry at wide receiver following the AJ Brown trade, and a big deal has been made about that, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. But Jacksonville, is a team with a young quarterback who's taken a step forward. I really thought Doug Peterson was the right guy for this team, and they started out pretty strong, then they went through a lull where it was like kind of felt like same old Jags,
Yeah.
but they finished strong here, so I think they deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, they're definitely nothing against Tennessee, but as you highlighted, the league high in terms of players on IR. They're a physical football team. I love Mike Vrabel, coach of the year last year. We know what he's about. They're going to make some changes here in the offseason. I mean, they fired their GM midseason, I think, since we last talked. Mostly feels like that was because of the AJ Brown situation, given the timing that he had in that one game really against them in Philadelphia, and then he gets really fired right around there. Just not paying him. I think there is some weapons here. I think there is some talent here. I think there's a couple good years left in Derrick Henry, but they got to shore up some more healthy offensive linemen. They have to figure out the QB situation there. There's been rumors. Do they make a play for Aaron Rodgers in the offseason? Who knows? Who knows if that will even be a possibility?
That'd
But
be interesting.
I think they need to do something there. Maybe Malik Willis, develops in the offseason. They drafted him for a reason, and maybe he comes back looking like a different player next season. I mean, who knows? But right now, it felt like they were losers of what 5 or 6 straight coming in here. Lose on a long a streak here to end the season. It's a rough thing what's going on there. And Jacksonville just at the moment. Not only they're the more healthy team, they're the more fun team. They feel like the more
Yeah.
deserving team right now. That the way they've played in the last couple months, it's gonna be fun to watch. Maybe what looks like right before our eyes, knock on wood, not to jinx anything, but looks like the next great young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. The steps that he's taken shows, as we've talked about before on this show, how important NFL coaching is and the disaster of what was going on there with Urban Meyer compared to Doug Peterson this year. It's night and day. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a completely different scenario. He talked after the post game about his love for Doug and really what he's been able to do. And even though he doesn't outright call it out, even though some players had talked about it in Jacksonville at the beginning of the season, you could tell by the words they say it's completely different energy they feel for this coaching staff as opposed to last season. And I really think you could see the strides, particularly on that offense. And that defense is coming alive. Walker has really looked good. First overall pick in the second half of the season. They made some great plays there on that defensive line. I really like a lot of those guys flying around. And Cisco made a great play on the back end there where he smacked a couple balls out of Burke's hands tonight. There's some players there. And then even Agnew as the returner, he could be a big factor in the playoffs. I mean, he had another great night returning the ball. Now, they didn't take advantage of a lot of his great field position that he set up. But anytime we saw what happened San Francisco and Green Bay last year, good or bad special teams can determine a playoff game. That could be an
Oh
interesting
yeah.
thing to watch, as it looks like the Jags will be set up probably to play the Los Angeles Chargers. It seems like they are on a date to crash there next weekend. It's super wild card weekend, as the NFL continually wants to call it. But overall, a night where Jacksonville had missed opportunities. That defense comes up with a huge play, and Josh Allen and all of them get together, score that touchdown. I'm not sure, honestly, if Tennessee was moving that ball well. They controlled possession really all game. They tried their damnedest. I'm not sure if that play doesn't happen. I don't know if Jacksonville comes down the field and scores. And we might be having a very different conversation about the situation that happened. And Tennessee might be winning the AFC South, and Jacksonville might be begging for the last wild card spot. They would have needed it was a weird situation where they could have still got into the playoffs, but they would have needed everybody else to lose to get the 7th seed. In this case, they take the simple route, win, you're in. And it ended up being a great night for a lot of Jag fans out there. I'm sure they are super, super excited. Before we get to the Sunday games, of course, give our final picks here for Week 18, let's jump back a little bit to the situation, yes, that happened on Monday night, but let's talk about more on the other side now that we can talk about this stuff, given that the situation has been overwhelmingly positive lately with Damar Hamlin. This has changed a lot of the AFC implications for the playoffs. We both agreed. I think almost everybody agreed it was the right decision to postpone that game on Monday. Honestly, I think it was the right decision to cancel the game outright, which is what they eventually did. I think it would have not only messed with the schedule too much, but putting both of those teams so in such a close manner to the incident that happened back on the field on the same field. I think it would have just been too much, too emotional.
Totally agree.
It just wasn't the right situation. I thought it was actually an excellent job. I know the NFL was received some criticism, but I actually thought they did a really excellent job, basically never having a playbook, a handbook on how to deal with a situation like this. Thankfully, I think what they did, from as we talked about the medical staff, that there was obviously something in place to, if this situation happens, this is how we deal with it. They did an amazing job, and now I think this is the best case scenario in terms of the football spot. Yes, there's been people that are not happy, particularly Bengals fans. You know what? The situation happened. It was unprecedented. It was scary. Get over it. And now the way it basically works out is if these top seeds lose, which it looks like it's probably going to be, KC is number 1 definitely, and then it's probably Buffalo and Cincinnati. If pretty much anyone else plays besides Kansas City, Buffalo in the AFC Championship, that game is played in the higher seed stadium. If it's Kansas City, Buffalo, it's at a neutral site. Now, they have not said what the neutral site is. I would imagine it's either a dome stadium or some warm weather place, because that just makes the most logical sense. You just have the least implications for travel problems or on the field problems as well, in terms of bad football or injuries or any of that stuff. Would not be surprised. I saw some people float around the idea of Indianapolis. The Colts obviously are way out of it. The NFL is very familiar there, going with the combine to Indianapolis. It's a dome stadium. It's kind of a midway point, sort of close for both teams. Think that would kind of make sense, but they have not determined that game. But that's the best case scenario with the situation. It's not going to make everybody happy, but I think it was ultimately, there was some ideas thrown around. I don't know if you saw this, about adding an 8th seed in the AFC to kind of balance it out. They were going to add an 8th playoff team, maybe, was an idea they floated around, and not have anyone get a bye. And I thought that was a really kind of like ill-advised decision, just because now you're stripping away the number 1 seed, and you worked all year to get a bye, and now you're not being rewarded for that, on top of no home playoff game for an AFC championship. I was like, that's just not the way to go. Plus, you're going to get probably another bad football game, because if you let a team in the AFC, you're probably going to have to let a team in the NFC, and those number 8 seeds are not there for a reason, because they're probably going to be really not great teams that are getting those seeds. And do you really want to watch the 1 seed absolutely annihilate the 8 seed to open Super Wildcard Weekend? Probably not. So I'm really glad that even though the money was probably enticing for them to have 2 extra games, the NFL decided against this. Brian, with all me just spouting all of that information out, kind of what's your takeaway on what the NFL ultimately ended up deciding for the AFC playoffs, and do you like it or do you not like it?
Yeah, I'm okay with it for the reasons that you outlined. You know, it's an unprecedented situation. I know that there's people out there who are of the argument that are dealing with the integrity of the sport, and certain teams not playing the requisite number of games kind of messes everything up. But I just think what you have to go back to is this was a situation that hopefully we will never see
Hopefully
again.
never.
You know, it happened, and I just think you have to do the best you can with it. I mean, like you said, you're not going to make everybody happy, but I think in this case, you just deal with it the way they came up with it. I just don't think there's a better way to do it. I get that there's going to be teams upset about, the not playing in their home stadium and that whole thing, but I really don't have any problem whatsoever. I just think with what happened, you kind of just have to make it up on the fly, sort of. And I think the league overall did a pretty good job handling the whole thing.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they took a couple days to not only let the situation work out with Demar medically, but also just to determine what are we going to do. There's a whole bunch of things there. NFLPA Association you're dealing with. You're dealing with the league office. You're dealing with those top teams. You have to be in constant communication, not only to outright cancel the game in what they did and postponing, then canceling it, but then to determine what's going to happen. It's a situation that just had to be done. They said, I read their whole long commissioner's office post, which I saw a lot of people on Twitter, as it speaks to our generation, just being like, hey, can someone summarize this? I'm not reading this whole thing because no one wants to read
That
it.
sounds like our
It sounds like
generation.
our
Yes.
generation, but I read the entire thing. There was a whole bunch of scenarios in there, and to sum it up, that's basically what it comes down to. If it's a Buffalo Chiefs AFC Championship game, it'll be played at a neutral site, and the NFL cited, hey, we didn't really want to push the playoffs back a week, which is basically what we would have needed to do, and we just didn't think that was worth it for our fans and for the teams, and ultimately, they don't want to say this, but they have a set date for those advertisers on the Super Bowl. They didn't want a whole situation to happen there if they had to push that back or get rid of the Pro Bowl and have it. They did not want to get into that. So I think suspending this game and ultimately canceling it was the right way to go. If this was a game between two non-playoff teams or a game that did not deal with seeding, no one would even care. It just unfortunately had to work out as being probably the biggest game of the year in the NFL. And thankfully, we ended up with a very positive situation in a medical situation with Hamlin, and this is the best situation on the outcome of football, which I don't think is going to be that big of a deal. I mean, a neutral site seems fine to me. I'm fine with a game not being played in Kansas City in 3-degree weather. I mean,
Yeah.
I think some of those players, if it's Buffalo, KC, both of those teams are used to playing the extreme cold. I'm sure they won't mind playing in a dome. I really don't think that's going to bother them. So, and those fan bases, they're going to travel. They're, like I said, they're probably going to pick a stadium that's kind of halfway between, so it makes it easier for those fan bases to get there. I think Indianapolis would probably be the best spot, but we'll ultimately see what happens if it works out like that. But yeah, we wanted to cover that well as we go into Week 18. We, of course, Brian, have some other implications here for the playoffs, and we're going to have to do some picks. I don't know how you want to do this. If you want to highlight some certain games, or you just want me to run it all the way down, and we'll kind of talk about it as we go through the picks. Does that sound good?
Yeah, run through all the games.
So we'll start at a useless game to kick this off. In the 1 o'clock game, the Houston Texans will go visit the Indianapolis Colts. Right now, I believe the Texans are actually not favored in this game. I believe the Colts are by 2.5
Yeah.
for some reason. I
Yeah.
have no idea why. The Colts have been an absolute mess. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this game. They're in the QB carousel market once again for the offseason. They've gone through everyone from Foles to Ellinger to, I mean, there's been so many guys that have been playing QB this season. Jonathan Taylor's been in IR for the last few weeks. He was not what he was this season, as well as the offensive line. They've been an overall massive disappointment. I think the last time we were together, we talked about the Frank Reich firing, and then they bring in Jeff Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
There's some crazy stat where he's been outscored by like over 100 in the fourth quarter since he's taken over the team. I mean, something insane. The debacle that happened in Minnesota, the largest lead we've ever seen happen. I don't think we've been here since that happened. 33-0, and then you lose that game. Horrific collapse. Even the minor collapse that they had in the fourth quarter against the Eagles, they blew that game. They've just been a bad team. Houston, on the other side, they've been a very bad team, but they've played really well the last month or so. There's been some interesting developments there as well, and I think they have a long way to go in terms of rebuilding that team, obviously. They'll be probably in the Bryce Young sweepstakes come the draft, but I've liked a little bit of the effort that they have shown as opposed to some teams around the league, especially the Colts. So for this one, I'm taking the Texans. I don't really agree with the 2.5-point line. I don't know why the Colts are favored that. I guess it's kind of just a home field discount, but right now the way the Texans are playing, for me, I think that they're the more safe bet for this game.
I'm with you. I'm taking the Texans. It's funny how the Jeff Saturday era started with a win against the aforementioned Las Vegas Raiders
Right?
in his head coaching debut. They went out to Vegas, they looked crisp, and it was like, oh, do they have something in Jeff Saturday here? Well, no. The wheels have fallen off since then. I don't think they've won a game since.
No.
You mentioned the game that they're up 33 nothing and blow that one. I mean, there's been clock mismanagement. He's looked how you would expect him to look when you bring in a guy who has no head coaching experience
No
whatsoever. I
NFL
mean,
coaching experience of any kind.
exactly. So, I mean, it was a head scratching move to begin with. It seemed one that was just Jim Irsay being Jim Irsay and the erratic owner that he is. So, I can't imagine that he comes back next season, although with Irsay at the
You never
helm,
know.
who really knows? I mean, I guess you have to come to expect the unexpected there. But with this game, I do expect it to be close, but yeah, I think the Texans have been trending in the right direction, and there's just, to me, very little to like about the Colts right now, so I'm taking Houston.
Yeah, I mean, you could clearly see in the AFC, you have the Jags and the Titans. I think the Titans will bounce back next year. And then you have the Colts and the Texans. It's a very flip floppy kind of way that we have seen the NFL go in the AFC South because how many years Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Colts are the top. Texans had so many years with Matt Schaub and J.J. Watt, all these guys. They were winning the top of the division. Always Titans and Jags were the bottom. It's kind of flip flop now, which is how the NFL goes as we kind of recycle the talent and the players on these teams. We'll go over to another game in the Vikings and the Bears. This actually is a big game for the Vikings. The Vikings need to win this game, and they need a San Francisco loss, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to gain back the number 2 seed, which they dropped last week in their pitiful performance against Green Bay at home, in Lambeau. Really, really bad look. The Vikings all year, I think I picked them to finish second, I think, in this division. Maybe I picked them first. Whatever it was, I picked them to go to the playoffs. But as the season has gone on, I've at least been of the belief, I'll be interested to get your thoughts in a second, that they're a very phony 12-win team.
Yeah.
They've won 11 one-score games. It's been the most in NFL history in a single season. Some of their comebacks, as we said, the Colts game, the Bills game. I mean, incredible wins. Hats off to them that they came back, but really improbable stuff that you really can't book down as efficiency, as something that you could count on week in and week out. And really, when the lights are brightest, this team does not play well. Now, this is a 1 o'clock window game against the Bears. I expect them to look dominant. You know, they're favored by 7 in here. I expect them to win this game pretty handily. They're the better team. They need to get some momentum going into the playoffs. But do I trust them going into next weekend? No, not at all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the story of what the Vikings are. You know, Justin Jefferson was in kind of the MVP race for a minute. And then he gets one catch for 15 yards last week, and that quickly was expunged. I think Dalvin Cook and kind of the running game has been a big disappointment for them, and their defense has been historically horrible for this season. That's going to be their absolute Achilles heel come playoff time. Justin Fields, will he break the QB rushing record? He's pretty close. I'll look up in a second. I think he's less than 100 yards of breaking that. Which was set by Lamar Jackson in 2019. So we'll see. That's the other interesting note for the Bears. But yeah, that's been a really rough season for them. They look promising early on. They've lost something like, 8 or 9 in a row. It's been them tumbling down in Chicago. So, Brian, what's your take on this game? Because I'm taking the Vikings. Interested to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm taking Minnesota. I mean, I agree with the point that the Vikings do look a bit phony, like frauds. And the thing is, it felt different after they had the crazy road win at Buffalo in overtime. After that game, you said, okay, the Vikings won a road game in that kind of environment, outscoring the Bills in just a crazy game, getting big turnovers, big scores. All right, this team feels different. And then what happened the next week? They got stomped 40-3 on their home
Yep.
field by Dallas.
Yep.
And so ever since, it's been kind of a topsy-turvy where they played decently well on Thanksgiving night against New England, but they've had some games where they haven't played all that well. I mean, last week it was just a complete no-show at Green Bay. It's interesting with the Bears. They're 3-13, but yet it feels like Justin Fields is the guy there now, and I think that's what this season was about, was
Yeah.
figuring out if Fields would be the guy. Well, I mean, passing numbers have been okay. The rushing has been spectacular. I mean, he's been ripping off 100-yard games on the ground. but it's not translating to wins. So it's
No.
kind of hard to make of what the Bears are at this point. I mean, I think it is a positive that the quarterback has taken such a big step that would give you some optimism going forward, but still a lot that has to be worked out with the Bears. But in this game, I like Minnesota. I just think I agree with you. They're the better team. Kirk Cousins in his 1 o'clock window, that's where he's comfortable with his array of weapons, and I think they'll be able to outscore the Bears.
Yeah, they actually just announced it looks like Nathan Peterman will be starting for the Bears, so they are holding out Justin Fields.
Yeah.
He's 63 yards shy of the record that Lamar Jackson set in 2019. He's obviously not going to be able to break that now. They're holding him out. They're citing the shoulder injury. He had that separated shoulder. I guess want to preserve him, hold him out. They're playing for nothing. But that's kind of stinks that he's so close to the record and he's not going to be able to play. I do kind of agree with a little bit of it. I think he deserves another season. They need to do something offensively in terms of getting him better offensive linemen and wide receivers.
Yeah.
They
Move
tried the
cannot
whole
be Chase Claypool.
yeah, they tried the
That,
whole
that cannot be
Claypool
your big
thing.
move.
Yeah,
Yeah, no.
has not worked out. I think we both talked in the offseason. They hired Eberflus, a defensive coordinator from Indianapolis. These days, we're not huge fans. Most people aren't of putting defensive minds at the head coaching kind of helm when you have young QBs. That's typically better when you have veteran QBs. You really want young offensive minds tied to your young QBs. I think they're going to need to do something there coaching wise as well. I don't know if that means getting rid of Eberflus, but definitely changing up some of the offensive personnel and offensive coaching there to kind of get the best out of Fields while you can, especially if you think he could be the future, which I think there's some there. I think he has to be developed more, especially as a passer. You need to get him more weapons and you need to see what you have next season, because if you don't and you don't think he's the guy, you have a pretty good QB class coming even next year, so that might be the way to go as well. So that's something that I think they have to determine here in the offseason. I think it's worth giving him another shot, and it really stinks that he's not going to get a chance, and we're going to have to watch Nathan Peterman QB a game here on Sunday. Not really the thing that I'm looking forward to. But overall, I think the Vikings will do what the Vikings do. They'll beat up on a bad team in the 1 o'clock window, and then we'll probably see them be one and done in the playoffs. But, that remains to be seen as we go on. We'll go to the Ravens-Bengals game, which has been a very interesting development. Bengals, of course, want to win this one. They want to, kind of secure their spot. I think there's a possibility somewhere. I'll have to check because of the game getting canceled, but I think there's a possibility that if they win and Buffalo loses, I think they can maybe take the 2 seed. I'll check that in a second. But overall, they want to win, get some momentum. They're going to be playing either way here next weekend. And then the Ravens, they're in the playoffs as a wild card, but they are a team trending massively down. I don't think Lamar Jackson is coming back this season. I do not blame him for not coming back. He's dealing with a PCL kind of sprain / maybe a little bit of a tear there. And honestly, when you don't pay me all season and I've been asking for a contract and I'm clearly the MVP of this team because look what you are with me and without me. Remember, this team again looked like they were poised to win the division and were fighting right at the top of being that number 1-2 seed before he went out with an injury again with very limited weapons that they've had. Really only Mark Andrews this season. He goes down. They've not been the same team. Huntley's he's a nice player, but he's a backup. He's not a guy that's going to win a playoff game most likely. There's not enough players on this team to really carry him to victory. And overall, the Ravens, this is getting a little bit ugly. They have to decide what they're going to do here. Are they going to pay him or not? I mean, you need to stop. I don't think a franchise tag is a good idea. I think there's a lot of bad blood that's potentially brewing here, and I think they have to be very careful what goes on with Baltimore and Lamar in that front office. So I'm taking the Bengals all the way. I think this is going to be a nice kind of cleanup game for the Bengals. They'll get back on track, kind of refocus their minds given what happened on Monday, and they're going to kind of steamroll into the playoffs.
I agree with that. And yeah, I'm very down on the Ravens. As you know, I had high hopes for them coming into the year. I thought Lamar Jackson was going to have a huge kind of prove it year. Looked like it was getting off to that kind of start. He got off to just a rip-roaring start. But then, wasn't quite the same. And then the injury, and it seems like there's not a whole lot of clarity on the severity of this injury. It seems like John Harbaugh isn't really offering too much on that. You
Yeah,
got to
that was
wonder
weird.
about his future. I mean,
Yeah.
we could talk about the future of the quarterback. The future of the head coach is in question. And I've been a Harbaugh fan, and he's
Me
been
too.
there a long time, and he's been a Super Bowl winner. but it just kind of feels like it might be running its course there, where they might be looking to make a change because some of the things that are going on with the Ravens, and part of it is a lack of talent. They just don't have the horses offensively. I mean, they've
No,
gotten a little more of a jolt in the running game with J.K. Dobbins, kind of
I like
resurgence
him.
here since he's come back from his latest injury. But there's just not enough there. I mean, even with Lamar healthy, we've seen him have times struggle because he doesn't have weapons.
For sure.
And when you have a quarterback, you got to surround him with good players around him. And I just don't think the Ravens have enough players right now. So yeah, I think the Bengals win this game and win it pretty easily.
Yeah, I think it's a situation where there's going to be a lot of teams this offseason. It feels like there always is, but I think there's going to be some potential big changes, some big hires, some big firings here coming up in only a few days. I don't know if John Harbaugh's on the way out, but I did not like that press conference that he gave where he basically was dismissing what was going on with Lamar, and not in a positive way of like, oh, hey, this is a non-story. More in the sense that like, where there's smoke, there's fire there, that they didn't want to talk about that situation. We know Lamar and kind of his mom are basically his own agent. It's a unique situation that goes on there. But the stuff that owner Steve Busciotti has said and a few other stuff is just weird. It's weird that, like, I understand he was asking for a big number, but I feel like that could be negotiated a little bit. I think reportedly before the season it was around the 180 range. I thought that was kind of laughably low given where the QB market is now. Watson might be the outlier, right? Now, like, it's reported that he was kind of asking in the realm for that contract. I don't think he'll get that. But you got to give him something better than if 180 was actually the true reported contract number. You see what you are without him. He's an MVP this league. He's won a playoff game. He's won the division. Like, I don't know how much more you can really ask for him when you keep every year progressively taking more and more weapons away from him, and the team is getting more and more injured. And now Lamar, he has this team where he's going, and then back-to-back years he's been hurt. I think partly because he's trying to do too much because he doesn't have enough guys, and he's not being protected well enough. Now, yes, he has to protect himself. He has to get better at that as well. But I just think that could be headed for a very ugly divorce. I would not be surprised if Lamar is not playing there next season, and that's a crazy statement to say. But I think if they franchise him, I don't know if he's playing on that tag. I don't think he's going to play. So that might be a holdout situation. We could be in for a very ugly mess going on there. So hopefully they get that contract wrapped up with a neat bow very soon after the season ends, and we can kind of get over this because they look very much one and done heading into the playoffs. Brian, your Jets go visit the Miami Dolphins. I think you should. I know you're shaking your head, but I think overall what the Jets did this season, I thought actually was impressive. I'm a glass half full guy on the Jets. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism here and hope. Of course, the Seattle loss last week sealed your fate. You're not going to the playoffs. It's not possible. The only way it was possible if they honestly opened up that 8th seed. Your biggest thing is the obvious. You have a massive QB problem. I don't care what Robert Saleh kind of keeps dressing as a bow, probably to keep the trade market value up. In my opinion, Zach Wilson's done in New York. I do not think he comes back next year. I think the guys seem like they hate him. It just does not seem like a good body language, good fit thing there. And for Saleh this week to be like, I think Zach needs to get away and read a book. I thought that was a really weird comment that he said as well. So, from all the players you've had there, and Mike White, and I think Joe Flacco was starring this weekend, and then you had that other guy from the Canadian Football League that was running around on that Thursday night game against Jacksonville. There's been some weird things that have happened there, but I think I'm at least of the mind in a rare way, I'm being the optimistic one here. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, particularly with this defense. There's offensive weapons here. If you can maybe get a Derek Carr this offseason, if that's a possibility, I think this team could contend for a playoff spot next year. But with that being said, I'm picking Miami. I know they got Skylar Thompson starting and all the QB issues they've had, but I'm telling you right now, Bri, not only I think they're the better team, even with the injuries they have at quarterback, they lose this game, Brian, I'm talking about Miami. This is one of the no matter the injuries, this is one of the all-time collapses we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. To be 8-3, and if you finish the season at 8-9 and miss the playoffs, That's going to be heads might roll. And there's reports that Mike McDaniels, which I think is crazy, but you know how the NFL is these days, they want instant results. There's reports he might get fired if they lose this game. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here, but at the moment, I'm going to take Miami. I'm going to give them a chance to make the playoffs. We'll have to see how the seeding works out in the New England Buffalo game. But Brian, what's your pick for this game? And kind of overall, give your quick thoughts on your New York Jets this season.
Yeah, I could see Sean Payton this being a potential landing
True,
spot for him
true.
if they decide to pull the plug on McDaniel. I just see that as being a fit.
Him and Brady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as for this game, I mean, my pick is Miami because why are they starting Joe Flacco? That's
I
the
don't know.
one thing that we have to address
I
right
don't
off
know.
the bat. If your coach is going to come out and give a vote of confidence for the young quarterback, which everyone thinks is ridiculous, well, why is he not playing him
And I think he's
in this
active,
game?
right? I think he's number 2 this week.
Right.
So I don't
So
know.
I don't understand what they're trying to prove with Joe Flacco. I mean, is it just to show him one last time before he rides off into the
I
sunset and
guess.
retires? I mean, it's like most of the games that Flacco hasn't even seen the field. He hasn't even been active. So and now they're putting him in the starting lineup. So I don't really understand that move. I mean, the quarterback. It's been a quarterback carousel as you document, and I really got a kick out of the Strevler running around because that's literally what it was.
It's
I mean, it
literally.
got so bad that Thursday night game against Jacksonville, Wilson got benched and was just atrocious. They put a guy in who is basically a practice squad quarterback. He can't throw the ball. And so all he was doing was running
And the
around.
crazy thing is, your offense looked way better. It was
Yeah.
so weird.
Well, it tells you a lot about Zach Wilson,
Yeah.
doesn't it? I mean, I'm with you. It's hard to envision a turnaround for him with the Jets. I mean, I guess it's possible he winds up going somewhere else and figuring it out. That's always possible, especially with the teams that I root for, as you know. But it's just gotten so bad with Wilson, and that's just what puts such a damper on the season. Is yes, they have made strides. They have at times looked like team that you feel good about going forward with some of the young players and seeming like they finally have a nucleus in place. But until you have a reliable quarterback, you're nowhere as a franchise. And so the Jets, even though they have taken a step and you love the emergence of Brees Hall and hope he can be the same guy coming off the injury and Garrett Wilson at receiver and some of the other weapons that they have, the quarterback is a major problem, and I don't think it's
Huge.
just as simple as bringing in a veteran and oh everything's fine. Like say
Okay.
they have Derek Carr next year, and now they're a 10-11 win team. That's what we said about the Broncos. They brought in a guy who people think is going to the Hall of Fame, and it's been a
Yeah.
dumpster fire. So I just don't think it's a quick fix that easily with the quarterback, but who knows? We've just been so beaten down with this franchise that, even in a year where there have been steps taken, you come out of the year with a bad taste in your mouth. And it's like only the Jets can do that. So I just think even though there have been positives, there's still, to me, not enough where I have overwhelming optimism going forward.
Well, ladies and gents, right there, you see the two sides of the glass, and glass half full, glass half empty on the Jets, and I understand. Listen, I get how Jets fans feel. Beaten down is probably the best way to say it. It's been hard. I just don't know if you don't go veteran QB, where do you go? You're going to draft another rookie in the second round or third round. I mean, because you're not going to be picking near the top. I don't think you bring Zach Wilson back, even though that's a possibility. But I just think that wouldn't make any sense. You're in a really tough spot, and to me, it seems like a veteran, like a Derek Carr, is the way to go. There's been some rumors about Jimmy G because of the connection with Saleh and Mike LaFleur. The whole San Francisco connection. I think that's a potential sort of good situation, but at the same time, he's an injury-prone QB. So it's like, do you go down that road and have him get hurt, and then now Mike White's back in again? Yeah, you're in for an interesting offseason there.
Let me just
You go.
throw out one other scenario. You mentioned earlier Rodgers to Tennessee. What about Rodgers to the New York Jets?
I don't think he would do it. It doesn't him, New York City. It just doesn't seem like his kind of move. And for me, I think Rodgers is. I mean, I'd be surprised if he leaves Green Bay in general, but if he does, I just don't think there's enough juice there or something with him. It just doesn't seem like I would do it if I was him. I think there's a lot of talent there, but I just don't think he wants that kind of spotlight of New York. I just don't think he does.
That's fair. Yeah, I was just throwing out there. I don't want to hear about Baker Mayfield. Let him thrive
Also a
with the Rams.
possibility. You never know.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not for Baker Mayfield.
No,
I'm really
I
not.
totally understand. Yeah, it'll be an interesting last game there. And we'll be talking very differently if the Dolphins end up losing this game. The Panthers and the Saints, we don't have to focus a lot on this game. I'm taking New Orleans. Panthers, they had their shot, literally, which is crazy to say, to win the division last week and go to the playoffs and knock off the Bucks. And in classic Panther fashion, even though Sam Darnold's played really well since he's come back in, he didn't make enough plays down the stretch. The defense just forgot. They couldn't figure out how to make a basic adjustment of, we should cover Mike Evans on go routes. That's a crazy idea. Let's let him get away for 3 times. That makes complete sense to just have him just running down the field with basically no one covering him. His 9th straight season of over 1,000 yards. He's been a very underrated player in this league. He's not had a great season, but that was an all-time game when they needed it between him and Brady. I mean, a game that sunk me in the playoffs in fantasy. So I definitely know how it feels that they actually showed up that week, and the Panthers just didn't do enough. Steve Wilkes has done a great job since he's come in as the interim coach, after Matt Rule got fired, but it wasn't enough. They're done. The Bucks are in, and right now, after that happened, there's some positives there. We'll see what happens in the offseason because David Tepper, the owner there in Carolina, is one of the most wealthy, if not the wealthiest owner in the NFL right now. It's talking individual because I guess the family that owns Walmart that came in for the Denver Broncos is technically have like $72 billion, something crazy as their net worth. But we'll have to see what he does in the offseason. There's been some rumors there and some contact with maybe Jim Harbaugh. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. But overall, I think New Orleans, they kind of steal a couple games away here to end the season. They win in Philly last week. I thought they should have won that game against Cleveland, and they kind of choked that game away. They've been very disappointing as well. They haven't figured out their QB situation all season long. Brian, who are you picking in this game to end this game, to end the season really with 2 non-playoff teams?
Yeah, I feel like this is one where you could just take a coin, flip it, and go with whatever lands because I can't really say one or the other. Like I feel really good about it, but I'm just gonna say the coin flipped Carolina, and I'm taking the Panthers.
Okay.
Sam Darnold, they've shown some signs of life, as you mentioned with the interim coach. Saints have played a little better here down the stretch, but I give Carolina credit for really hanging in there. I mean, after the McCaffrey trade, you thought this would be like one of the worst teams we've ever seen, and they've actually been competitive in a lot of games. So I'm going to say they go out with a bang here and get a road win.
That's fair. Fire their coach, trade McCaffrey, trade Robbie Anderson, and they still had a chance to win the division. So definitely hats off to Steve Wilkes down there. We'll see how that season ends for both those teams. The New England Patriots, they'll visit Buffalo. And this is an interesting game that we don't have to spend a ton of time on, but it's still very interesting because Buffalo really needs to secure this win for a playoff seed to keep the 2 seed, right? Because if the Bengals win, they move up, Buffalo moves down. That's a whole thing, right? The other interesting thing is New England, and I know this is crazy to say, but Bill Belichick, this is now the 3rd year now without Tom Brady. That legacy is getting a little bit in question in some ways, just in terms of post-Brady, and it's looking a lot more like it was Brady than actually Bill in a lot of those championship runs because they missed the playoffs 2 out of 3 years, and remember, they made it last year. It got absolutely shellacked and embarrassed by Buffalo in the opening game, where Buffalo literally had probably the most perfect game you could have offensively. They didn't punt the ball a single time. That's a potential situation that could happen in this game here. I'm picking Buffalo. They're favored by about 7.5. I'm seeing right now. New England very much in danger of missing the playoffs. If they lose, they're pretty much completely out of the playoffs. The other interesting thing is, Bri, let's say they win this game, the Patriots. Let's say Cincinnati loses and Buffalo still keeps the 2 seed. You know who's playing next week? The Bills and the Patriots. And we're going to see the same repeat of probably Buffalo then going, all right, let's turn it on now and destroy them. So either way, I think the Patriots, they're in for a lose-lose situation, whether they lose this week or next week. It doesn't really matter. Buffalo's beating them down either way. Bry, I figure I know your pick, but what is it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Bills play, after all the emotions of the week. Like, you could see it going either way, where they come out just guns a blazing and they're on their A game and they win, 40-10, or did like all the emotion of the week kind of take its toll and they kind of come out sluggish? Like, it's kind of hard to say for me, but I am going to go on the side of a win here just because I don't think the Patriots pose enough of a threat, offensively. We've well documented their issues. There's just not enough firepower offensively, and I think the Bills are going to be more so on their A game, and Josh Allen with his weapons will have their way at home. So I'm going Bills.
I also want to make a quick note that I think Sean McDermott should be in serious consideration for Coach of the Year. Not only how well that team has played, but think about everything that they have had to deal with this season. You had obviously the most recent DeMar Hamlin situation, which we documented at the beginning of the show. They had a horrible, horrific shooting that happened up there in the Buffalo area this season. They've had two historic snowstorms that they had to relocate games, had players lost, had everything going on. They had dangerous injuries. Remember Micah Hyde in week 2, he had a neck injury and had to be carted off the field. They've been dealing with so much stuff. I believe also Dawson Knox lost his brother during the season as well. I mean, there has been a million things going on in Buffalo, and what Sean McDermott and that coaching staff has been able to hold those players together and have them play at a very high level, I think it's hats off to them as well. And I think also going through the transition, even before the season, of losing the brilliant mind that we've seen in Brian Daboll, we see what he's been doing in New York. I think Sean McDermott should be in serious consideration for Coach of the Year of what he's done with that team. So that's a note that I wanted to make there before we
Yeah,
moved on.
I think that's a good point. And
Yeah.
one thing too that we've heard coming out of all this week is just how close this Bills team is, and that was before everything went down on Monday night. So this seems like it's really a very together group, and it's the coach that sort of sets the tone for that. So yeah, I mean, he's done a great job since he's gotten that
Absolutely.
job in Buffalo, and as you laid out, all the extras that he's had to deal with to keep this team at an elite level, is a job well done out of him for sure.
Yeah, I think he should be right up there in serious, serious consideration. The Tampa Bay Bucks will play the Atlanta Falcons, and this is kind of a useless game. I mean, basically all this game determines is, does Brady go under 500 really for the first time in his career, or do they just get another victory here? They already secured their playoff spot. They're locked into the 4 seed. The Falcons are out of the playoffs. I mean, nothing can happen besides that one note. With that being said, I'm taking Tampa Bay. I think they want to come in sharp. They want to really maybe give a good 3 quarters before they sit all their starters. Really want to get out to a lead, sit everybody, but they don't want to come out kind of flat next week where they'll be hosting a playoff game. So I think this is going to be a pretty lopsided game against Ritter, who's starting, I think, his 3rd or 4th game now for the Falcons as a rookie. I see Tom in Tampa, even though they've been kind of inept on offense. We saw a little bit of life last week. Maybe they continue that this week down in Atlanta, and they're going to get this win.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised seeing that Atlanta is a 4-point favorite,
Me
and
as
I
well.
guess that
Yeah.
really is just about the idea that the Bucks are going to be sitting players at some point in this game. I don't think it matters. I'm with you. I think we've agreed on just about every pick so far. It seems like it's kind of a predictable week. We both had the Texans, which that might have been one that could go either way. But yeah, I'm with you again. We're lock stock so far, and I'm with you. I've not been on the Bucks this year.
Yeah.
I mean, you haven't liked how they play, especially offensively. But what does Atlanta bring to the table with Desmond Ritter? I mean, come on, it's not a whole lot. So
No.
I'm going Bucks.
Yeah, I think the only one we've disagreed on now is that Panthers Saints game, which, as you said, is really
Right.
a flip a coin game. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. But we'll see how that shapes out. The final 1 o'clock game is Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Another game that actually does have some playoff potential because the Steelers need help. They need a few teams to lose. They need New England to lose and Miami to lose, which are completely possible. Definitely the New England one, a lot more possible than the Miami one. But they can sneak into the playoffs again for the 2nd consecutive year in the 7th seed. Kenny Pickett has played decently well here down the stretch. This defense has played well all year. They've had a crazy, insane positive record when TJ Watt actually plays. And I think overall there's some upside for this team but I think it's going into the future. Because in this game, I'm taking the Browns. I think the Browns, I think the life that they've showed, Watson has gotten better every week. He's nowhere near what he used to be. But remember, this man basically wasn't playing football for 2 years. So it's gonna, for all the off-season stuff and all the off-field stuff that we don't need to talk about, in game shape, in game timing, you can't replicate that on a practice field. You can't replicate that in OTAs or walkthroughs. You need to play some live games against some real competition. And I think we saw what he did in Washington last week, ending their season. There's been a lot of improvement. We'll see where Cleveland is in their trajectory going into next season, but I think they're going to put the final nail in the coffin for the Steelers. It's been a nice little run here for Pittsburgh, but they need to retool some things going into the offseason, and I think they dug themselves too much into a hole early on, and I don't think they're going to be able to climb out of it like last year.
Yeah, you give them credit for coming back the way they have. It looked like it was going to be a totally lost season, and leave it to Mike Tomlin to make it questionable whether they would have a losing season. But I'm with you. I think it is the first time under Tomlin that they will end up with a losing
Yeah,
season, because the Browns, what they can do is just slow down the game with that running game. I just have a feeling it's a big Nick Chubb afternoon in
feels like it.
Pittsburgh. I like Kenny Pickett. The game with last week was impressive against Baltimore, where he had the late drive and the touchdown pass to Najee Harris that ultimately won the game. But I just don't look at the Steelers and say, this team playoffs this year. I
I didn't feel
just
it last
can't.
year either.
Yeah. So I'm with you on the Browns.
The fourth 25 games kick off with the Los Angeles Rams playing their final game in the season against Seattle Seahawks. This is a game that is another playoff implications game, just like the Steelers-Browns game, just for one team. The Seahawks need to win this game, and they need the Packers to ultimately end up losing to sneak into the playoffs. That's what they need to happen. I think Seattle's going to win this game. They won it down to the wire in Los Angeles. The Rams have played decent in the last month, not really considering the Packers game, but overall, that Christmas Day miracle present that I got gift wrapped against Denver. Believe it or not, that's the first time I think we've scored over 15 points in something like 17 years.
Wow.
That was an insane game. They've played well. The last time we talked was the Raiders game where I had no voice. I mean, there's been some amazing games down the stretches, but overall, this team is very depleted. They're the second most injured team in the league behind the Tennessee Titans. They've pretty much lost everyone, including their starting quarterback, Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp. Pretty much every offensive lineman. They've had the most interchangeable offensive lineman this entire season in the league, and something like in the last 10 years or some crazy stat like that, or even more. I think right now is also a time to talk about what's going on there head coaching wise. We're going to talk about in a second after you give your pick, but I'm taking Seattle in this one to win this and kind of end the Rams season in unspectacular fashion.
Yeah, I'm taking Seattle as well. I mean, before the season, there would not have been a single prognosticator, expert, whatever you want to call him, that would have said Seahawks would have a chance to make the playoffs in Week 18. Not one person. Everyone would have unanimously thought this team would be one of the worst in the league.
Yep,
So they have gotten a lot out of
they
this
deserve
season.
credit.
We know about the whole Geno Smith kind of redemption tour, if you will. They've been impressive in the emergence of Kenneth Walker taking over the backfield and looking like a legitimate weapon as a running back. So yeah, I just think, the Rams, look, they've given it what they had this year, the 50 points, like you mentioned on Christmas. I didn't even watch that game, and I just
Crazy.
looked at the score and was like, what? That was just a
I loved every
whopping
minute.
number. But yeah, I mean, rightfully so for you. That made it a good Christmas, I'm sure. But yeah, for this game, I'm taking Seattle.
Yeah, it's been a really rough season. They already have it, and they're gonna extend it most likely if this outcome ends up going the way I think it is, and the most losses ever for a team that just won the Super Bowl. We're the Super Bowl champs until another one is crowned here in February, but that's pretty much all we have our hats to hang on. Just a quick note, as I just hinted at, there's been a report today. Really, it looks like McVay might be done as coach of the Rams. I could give more of my thoughts on that if it actually happens next episode. But overall, from the top, I think that would be a really bad look for McVay. I'm grateful for everything he's done for the team and the Super Bowl that we won, the 2 Super Bowls that we went to, all the playoff runs. But overall, having your first, I understand there's some off-field stuff going on, but to have your first bad season and kind of just bail on the team that's in cap and draft pick hell, I think is a really bad look. Um, yeah, I just don't think that's a great look. So if that ends up being true, which it seems more and more like there is serious momentum that's going to be true, I'd rather it be a situation where he leaves, he's done, and we can actually be in the head coaching market. I think what is going to happen, and what I'm most afraid of, is that he kind of extends it a month or a month and a half. We miss out on all the good coaches, and then we're in no man's land where we're putting in like Raheem Morris or someone stepping in, very much like the Bucks did, which is why I said before the show started. So, a situation certainly to monitor. His press conferences have not been reassuring, saying I'm the head coach right now. Very similar to what he said as Jared Goff is the quarterback right now, and then we know how that happened. So it does not look good. It seems like it's like a 80% chance he's out the door. So that will be something to definitely talk about in the offseason. So I wanted to mention that. Moving on, the other Los Angeles team, which shellacked the Rams last week, and the Los Angeles Chargers, they'll visit the Broncos. I guess the Broncos are favored by 3 here because the Chargers
Yeah.
are sort of going to sit everybody. Overall, though, I'm still taking the Chargers because I don't respect the Broncos at all. I know they've played kind of inspired, I guess, last week against KC, where they actually had a lead going into the fourth quarter there. But overall, we're going to talk about this next week when the season ends. This season has been disastrous since we last talked. Nathaniel Hackett got fired really after that Christmas game debacle. I mean, that was the final straw against the Rams there, and we've seen him on his way out. He looked like he was in over his head. We even talked about that going into the offseason when he ultimately got the job, and we'll talk more about this franchise overall as we go into the offseason. But I don't respect them enough, even if the Chargers rest starters. I don't think they're going to win this game, and I think it'll be close, but I think maybe a field goal game, but I see the Chargers pulling this one out.
Yeah, even with the question of who is going to be playing and who's sitting for the Chargers, I just can't feel good about picking Denver in this
Yeah.
game. So I'm with you on the Chargers. I mean, every time we brought up the Broncos this year, rightfully so, it's been criticism because that's all you can
I
say
know.
about them. This
Too
season
bad.
has just been an abject failure, and I don't think there was any choice but to make the change that they did at the head coach spot. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I mean, there's talent on the roster where they could make a turnaround next year if they get the right guy
Yeah.
in, or if Russell Wilson is just finished, then they're going to be in trouble for a long time.
Yeah, definitely one of the most disappointing seasons I've seen in a long, long time. Probably in all the years I've been watching the NFL in terms of the hype. I mean, hey, we were a part of that hype of hyping up this division to be maybe the greatest division ever. It certainly did not shake up like that. I mean, at least 2 teams ended up making the playoffs, in the Chiefs and the Chargers. But overall, we also, I will say, and we didn't think the Broncos, neither of us thought they'd be this bad, but we both picked this team to be in 3rd place, I believe. So it's not like we were super, super high on the Broncos. We had them at the bottom of the division as well. I think the hype of them being easy Super Bowl favorites was ridiculous to start the season, but no one could have predicted how bad this has really gone. The Cardinals go visit the Niners. You want to talk about really bad picks. You had the Raiders going to the playoffs and playing well this season. I had a worse pick. I had the Cardinals winning the NFC West. So, yeah, clown me in the comments because I deserve it. They're definitely one of the worst teams in football. They've had some injuries, sure. But overall, it looks like the Kyler Murray situation has gone really sour. We talked about that stuff in the offseason. Didn't look great. They gave him a contract. Given what that contract was and the clauses that were reportedly into it, not great. Not a good thing to have a great relationship with your QB. And then it looks like Cliff Kingsbury will probably be on the chopping block come Monday. They don't look like, especially Kyler to Cliff Kingsbury, it doesn't look like there's any respect there whatsoever. They've been a complete failure as a team that should have won the division last year, made it to the playoffs, and collapsed down the stretch for the 2nd straight year. They weren't even competitive this year. That's been a complete failure down there in Arizona. Them and the Raiders really have been the 2 biggest failures, I would probably say, in the NFL in terms of hype that they had coming in and talent. And San Francisco on the opposite side, they've had a million problems go on, particularly with the QB spot. It don't matter. They keep winning. Keep winning. Brock Purdy. Big comeback last week. People wondering if he could come back against any team. Comes back against the Raiders. Looks pretty decent. They don't need him to be a superstar. They just need him to be serviceable. This team is very, very dangerous, Brian. Right now they're locked into the 2 seed. They win. They will be the 2 seed. Or if the Vikings lose in the 1 o'clock window, they'll be the 2 seed. Who are you picking in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 49ers have the highest upside of any team
Yeah,
in the
for sure.
NFC. So where I think they got a very good chance to come out of the conference and be in the Super Bowl, with the kind of talent they have, regardless of what's gone on with the quarterback. And Brock Purdy has held his own, Mr. Irrelevant, suddenly very much Mr. Relevant,
Right?
and doing a good job. So, yeah, I mean, this game, I think it's a pretty easy call with the 49ers. I don't think it'll be particularly close. And I really just wonder, if we're going to see the 49ers make a big run because I could certainly see it happening. I really thought after they made the McCaffrey deal that really signaled this team was all in with a chance to really do some major damage. And I think if they matched up with a team like the Cowboys, I would feel very good about the 49ers
I would as
beating
well.
Dallas.
I think they're the most dangerous team in the playoffs, particularly in the NFC. I mean, the Cardinals are starting David Blau for the second straight week. We know the unfortunate injury that happened with Kyler Murray, torn ACL. Will he even start the season? We've missed all that since we've last recorded, so it's been a really rough season there. But the Niners, they look dangerous. I mean, there's even been talk that Nick Bosa might be involved in some MVP votes. I mean, the way he's played and how he's impacted the game, it's been absolutely incredible. So hats off. It kills me as a Rams fan to say it, but hats off to the 49ers. It's been a great season. They've done great. I would have picked them to win the division. I was just very unsure with Trey Lance starting at QB. If you told me Jimmy Garoppolo was going to QB, I would have picked them. I don't
Yeah.
think I understand the way they're playing under Brock, but honestly, I think it's more of a detriment and a slight to Trey Lance. I don't think they'd be playing like this if Trey Lance was QB. I think that's how well Brock is playing and how Jimmy was his typical kind of average game manager. I just think Trey Lance leaves a lot to be desired. They have some big, big questions, good questions, but big questions come the offseason. If the Niners make a run here in the playoffs with Brock Purdy, Jimmy's out the door already. There might be some questions. How can we turn the keys over to Trey Lance once again? There
Yeah.
might be some questions there, so we'll have to see how that plays out come the offseason. The final 425 game, Brad, is Cowboys visit the Commanders. The Commanders now out. Ron Rivera was not aware of that situation last week when that went on. They had a nice little run there. I thought it was a horrible decision that they went back to Carson Wentz. I know they were
100%.
I know that they were not playing great after they had that whole winning streak with Heineke, but he's clearly the better quarterback. He's
Yeah.
clearly the guy that these players just like better. Wentz might have more physical talent, but this is the third team now we've seen where the team does not rally around this guy. I mean, he just some guys just don't have the intangibles. They just don't. And this team has utterly collapsed. They've been dead in the water since he's taken over, and it cost them their season. I think that might cost Ron Rivera his job. I'd be very careful there in Washington. I think there's been some strange decisions that have happened there. There's some players there in Washington, but overall, they stayed in it. It's been a little bit of a disappointing season. I think if they lost it and didn't make the playoffs, but Heineke was starting, I'd be more okay with it. But that Wentz decision I thought was inexcusable given what happened there down the stretch. I just don't understand it at all. And we saw that come to a head there against Cleveland. With all that being said, Dallas should easily win this game. Listen, they want to ride high going into the playoffs. There's a very, very slim chance that they can get the number one overall seed. Philly would have to lose. The San Fran would have to lose. It's probably not possible. So they're going to most likely be playing next week. They're going to be hosting a game. Right now, they're sort of locked into the fourth seed, it seems. If everything plays out, they're playing Tampa. So they got to get ready for that game. They got to look good on all cylinders. Amidst this playing well, they beat the Eagles with their backup QB. Dak has been turning over the ball a lot. So they really need to get that side of the ball kind of shaped up here. But this should be an easy win against Washington. Division rival, but I still think Dallas is going to dominate them.
Yeah, I mean, it's alarming that Dak is the league leader in interceptions, especially when you consider how much time he missed earlier in the
Games,
season.
right?
So,
So
yeah, that's a concern. I mean, I'm taking the Cowboys. I think we actually might have brushed over the Giants-Eagles matchup in the
you were
425
correct. We did. We'll go back to that in a second.
Yeah, because that the Giant fans listening might be a little perturbed if we
They
just
they might be,
skipped
yes.
over their team.
But you're taking the Cowboys overall.
I'm
And you,
taking the
yeah.
Cowboys. Yeah.
So as you said, we'll go right back to that 425 game, the actual final 425 game, the Giants Eagles. Big playoff contention game as well, but the Giants are pretty much resting everyone. I mean, they're locked
Yeah.
into the sixth seed. There's really no reason for them to play anyone besides I understand it's that whole situation. Do you want to go in flat into the playoffs or blah blah blah? I think what has been done there in New York has been nothing short of amazing. I mean, I thought the Giants were going to be the worst team in this division by far, and for everything of Brian Daboll to come in to get the best out of Daniel Jones. They've had some injuries. They really have had not great top tier talent at wide receiver, and they're
Hmm.
figuring out the offensive line still. Barkley's had a great bounce back season. This defense has played well. I think they should be commended for how well they've played, and they don't need this game besides basically to screw over the Eagles. The Eagles, who announced earlier tonight, Jalen Hurts will start after he's missed the last 2 games. He's banged up with a shoulder injury. They need to win this game to secure the number 1 seed and kind of get their season back on track. They're in a lot of trouble, in my opinion, Brian. I think they're going to win this game, given that the Giants are sitting everyone. But I think even with the number 1 seed, I think when they play that first game in the divisional round, they might be a one and done team, Brian. I mean, Hurts is not going to be the same, presumably, when he comes back. We saw Josh Sweat go out last week. They've had a couple injuries in the last 2 weeks on this defensive line. They've been banged up everywhere. I'd be very, very concerned of what I'm seeing there in Philadelphia right now. They're going to win this game this weekend, but going into the playoffs, I'm not really liking it unless Jalen comes back 100%, which I don't think he's going to be. So, what's your take kind of on that in this game and going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting we've talked about the Eagles because, they've been among the best teams all season, but I kind of raised the point at one point. I wondered, just how good they are. I think they are pretty good. I think down the stretch, some weaknesses have kind of come to the fore, especially defensively, and then Hurts kind of missing some time, even though Gardner Minshew, the one game, played very well
He did,
against Dallas.
and,
But,
and then and then against the
the defense
Saints,
gave up 40 points. Yeah,
the Saints was
you
not good.
can't do right. The Saints game wasn't good, but yeah. I mean, I think I have a little more optimism than you do. I don't know that I'd be concerned that the Eagles would lose in the first round of the playoffs. I just still think they are a pretty strong, well-rounded team, even with some of the issues that they're dealing with. I like them in this game coming up. Because, like you mentioned, the Giants are basically resting everybody. I think it's going to be
Yep,
Davis Webb at quarterback for the Giants.
I believe
So,
so.
yeah, you can't really expect too much there. But to me, there's no better example of the fact that coaching matters across the NFL than the example of the New
100%.
York
We've been saying it
Giants.
all year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been a total change in all facets of the game. I mean, and the defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, has helped enormously. Brian Dable looks like he's the guy there for the long term, just with how he set the tone from the first game of the season and how they've responded. As you said, they've gotten the most out of Daniel Jones with not the greatest supporting cast around him. So you just have to be so impressed with the job that he's done, and it looks
Absolutely.
like they're set for a playoff matchup with the Vikings, which would be interesting because those two teams had just met recently.
Oh
Very
yeah,
good game. Vikings came out on top on a long field goal, but I would give the Giants a very good
I
chance
would
to
too.
beat Minnesota.
I would too.
So we'll see if that happens. But for this game coming up, you got to take Philly with Hurts coming back and Giants resting starters. We're going Eagles.
Yeah, this is a huge game for the Eagles. They have to right this ship. They got to put out the fire here, and they got to get Hurts kind of back on the flow of things. And yeah, I would be if it's Minnesota Giants, if that's the way it works out, be very interested. I think it was a 61-yard kick that ended up winning it for Minnesota at the buzzer. Would really be interested in seeing that matchup once again. So now the game that got flexed into the Sunday night because of the playoff implications, the Detroit Lions. They'll go visit the Green Bay Packers. It's a classic division matchup that has happened for God knows how many decades now. Basically since the start of the league, we're going to see these two teams go at it. But playoffs are on the line now. Green Bay scenario, easy. Win, you're in. They were 4-8. They've kind of gone on they would be on a 5-game winning streak to go into the playoffs. Rodgers has not played well in that stretch. Doesn't matter. They've been winning games. Detroit, we need to win this game, but also they need Seattle to lose to the Rams in the opening game. So the way it kind of got set up, Detroit was apparently pushing for those games to take place simultaneously, which I understand. But from the NFL perspective, want to put the Packers on a Sunday night, kind of primetime standalone game. The NFL, I think, kind of low key is hoping that Seattle loses because they want this game to have some serious implications of both teams. If you win, you get in. kind of situation. I think it'll be very fascinating to watch if Seattle wins. Does Detroit, do they have enough energy to come out and just play spoiler and knock the Packers out of the playoffs and let Seattle get in? That will be the ultimate question here. So this game can get a lot more interesting if the Rams actually are able to take down Seattle, which we both predicted is not going to happen. But the Packers have had a lot of breaks. They've had a lot of teams, including Detroit, lose here down the stretch. They had the Tua concussed kind of game there around Christmas that he ends up having 3 picks in the fourth quarter, and they steal that game. Rodgers has not played well. This has probably been his worst statistical year of his career, which is very strange coming off of 2 straight MVPs. But as we've documented, there's been a lot of changes there, a lot of kind of moving parts there in the offseason in Green Bay, especially with Aaron Rodgers and the things he has said. But overall, I'm taking the Packers to win this game. I think they're winning. I think they're going to get in. And then, hey, if you get into the dance, we'll see what happens, right? I mean, at the moment, they would be on a collision course with the San Francisco 49ers, which I do not like that matchup for them at all. But for the moment, we'll see what happens and how Sunday shakes out. So, Bri, how do you think the final game of the regular season takes place?
Yeah, well, look, I thought the Packers were dead and buried weeks
We
ago.
both did.
I really thought this team was totally out of it. They just seemed lifeless. It seemed like there was just nothing cooking there. But Rodgers has had a habit, some of these seasons of going on these late season binges of winning
Mm-hmm.
where, they kind of come out of nowhere. Remember the one year where he urged everybody to RELAX,
Yep.
and after that they wound up winning like their final
Can't
8
forget.
games or something? Yeah. So he kind of has a habit of it. I think they're going to continue their winning ways. I really think kind of the turning point for the Packers was that game against Dallas where they won at home and they got one of their rookie receivers in Christian Watson going. He had 3 touchdowns that game. That kind of set the tone for a big second half for him, kind of became the number one weapon for Rodgers, who was starving for production from somebody in this wide receiver group. So I think getting that was huge. And their defense has been kind of an underrated unit.
They
Probably
played
one of the
well.
better defenses in the game. You're very big on defense, so I'm sure you're on top of that. But yeah, I trust the Packers more than a Jared Goff led Lions team. They've been a nice story this year. Dan Campbell, I definitely think is the right guy to lead that team going forward. But I just think going into the bear, if you will, that is Lambeau with the Packer team that's playing well, I just think the Packers keep it going and find
I,
their way in to the playoffs.
No, I agree. I just think what holds Detroit back is that defense, which has been one of the worst in the league. There's some pieces there, but they definitely have to add more pieces in the offseason, a lot more. I don't want to discount Jared Goff. He's in the second half of the season, he's gone 17 touchdowns to 1 interception. I mean, he's been
He's
great.
been good.
So like,
He's been good.
and also, Jamal Williams there in the backfield. He has a chance on Sunday tomorrow to break Barry Sanders' Lions rushing touchdown record for a season. So like, I don't want to discount what's going on in Detroit. I think they've played really well. We both talked about that there's something about Dan Campbell that we really liked, and we initially had skepticism, and he's kind of won us over. I think he is a guy that deserves another year. They just got to add some more pieces here. I know there's been a lot of things on Ram Twitter that's like, do this for Jared, because if we beat Seattle, then they have the chance to control their own destiny. I would like to see him get in. I think it'd be a great story. We'll know that, unfortunately, before this game is even played, if he even has a chance at that. But overall, I think the Lions should be really happy with what they did this season. Everyone thought they'd be one of the worst teams in the league, and to be vying for the playoffs in the last week of the year against a bitter division rival. I mean, what more can you really ask for? I think they should be really proud of what they've done. And yeah, the Packers, they got a chance to squeeze and sneak into the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to like getting into the playoffs come next Sunday or next Saturday. But, for the moment, you want to get into the dance, and that's really what it's about. And we'll talk more about kind of their future, Rodgers' future, as we hinted at and talked about. Will he be on the move to a Tennessee? Maybe a pipe dream to the Jets or a Denver. I mean, who knows? Well, not Denver anymore, but who knows anymore? Maybe a Vegas has been talked about as well. So there's a number of spots that can end up happening for Rodgers. So guys, that's kind of our thoughts here on going into the Week 18 season, the 2022 NFL season, the final week of the regular season. A lot of things to talk about. As always, timestamps are down in the description below. There was a lot that we talked about from some somber and now very encouraging news with the Hamlin stuff, and really talking about a lot of the head coaching potential carousel, all the games and the playoff implications breaking down going to the final week, and the two games that were played tonight here on Saturday, which did determine a number one seed and a division winner. So those were two pretty important games that ended up taking place. If you've listened this far, because I know this has been a very, very long episode, we've been gone a month. That's what ends up happening. We're going to try to be back here more regularly every single week here for the playoffs, so please stay tuned for that. I'll probably announce it somewhere, whether it's on the other podcast that you watch on Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything or somewhere else that I'm sure a lot of you viewers are from as well. Comment below as always. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear your predictions on your favorite teams of the playoffs and what you think is going to happen. Overall, it would be great to hear from you. And as always, like the video and subscribe channel and share with your friends if you'd be so kind. Brian, before we head out of here, any final thoughts here for the regular season? I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got it pretty well covered, honestly. But I guess my final thought, I think we just have to reiterate, how we started and just how uplifting it is to see, the humanity, if you will, from everyone involved in light of the Damar Hamlin situation. The fact you said $8 million with his
That's
charity
like
when it had a
crazy.
goal of like, yeah, and I've seen the same figure, and that's just it's mind-boggling that it's that
It's
much, but
awesome.
it shows the support that people have and that he's doing better. It makes you almost root for the Bills. And I mean, as a Jet fan, that it might be a little tough
Yeah.
to say, but when something like that happens, you have to almost just want the best for this team going forward. And this is a team that going into the year had the highest, Super Bowl odds going into the year, and now it's really going to be that much more of a story with everything that's happened this week. So playoffs will be fascinating as always.
Yeah, playoffs will definitely be fascinating, but first and foremost, as you said, we're grateful that situation worked out. It's very encouraging what's going on with him health wise, and thankfully, again, hats off to everybody out there. All those underrated people. A few of them have been shared on Twitter, and the medical professionals that saved his life on the field, administered CPR, everything they did from the hospital to the on the field personnel, they all deserve to be commended. Even on this little tiny podcast that not a ton of people are watching, still wanted to say that because that has to be spotlighted. It just you can't overstate the value of what they did, and the broadcasting crew, everyone. Once again, I mean, just in an unprecedented situation, an amazing job all around, and we're so glad for Damar and his family that things seem to be working out in an excellent manner, the best possible outcome. But guys, as I said, thank you for being with us if you're still here all the way to the end. We'll be back next week for Super Wild Card Weekend, because I have to keep saying that stupid name because the NFL really wants to push the super part of the Wild Card Weekend. But yeah, until then, enjoy your weekends, enjoy your week, and we'll be back for some more playoff football next time. Until then, thanks for watching.